I hope you got the notes on equalizing with shelving filters and peaking filters. To get started, frequency ranges. The human audio range can be broken down into different frequency ranges, and each frequency range has a unique sound that contributes to the overall sound quality of an instrument's mix. One of the things I like to look at is a chart that basically shows all of the sounds and all of the instruments that we may hear and we may work with as we're mixing or as we're recording. So as you can see here up on the top, male, female, kick, timpani, tom. What we're looking at in the red is the fundamental, and anything in the yellow, that's going to be your overtones. So in this case, you could see that the kick drum has its fundamental, and of course it's located in the lows from anywhere from 50 to about, it looks like 500. If you look down here on the bottom, you'll kind of see here what we're talking about as far as our frequencies. And so in the low frequency range, from 20 to 250, the low frequency range, you can see they call that the sub bass and bass. And in our case, from our book, low frequencies from 20 to 250. The lower mid-range frequencies, and as you can see here, bass to mid-range, lower mid-range frequencies are from 250 to 1K. The upper mid-range frequencies, 1K to 9K, mid-range to high mids, and the high frequencies from 9K to 20K. What I like looking at, of course, is you can see the different adjectives that we could see here, the chest thump or the rumble, bottom, boom, warmth, all of that located or associated with bass, essentially, right? In the mid-range in that side, you can see here, and they've got some similar kind of funny ways, whack and tinny. I think that's kind of funny. High mids, high frequencies, crunch, edge, sibilance, definition, piercing, and then of course we were talking about that air band, 20K. All of these we're going to utilize. How are we going to use them? Well, within our channel EQ here in Logic. And so with that, I don't want to assume that we know where that's at. What I see a lot of times is, of course, you guys will have several tracks set up, and maybe potentially within the track, you don't have any type of EQ at all to attenuate lows, to attenuate highs, maybe to boost, to cut. With what we're talking about here then, let's just go to our channel EQ, and that's located in EQ. And let's talk about all of the things up here. These are our filters. What are these things essentially, right? The first one that we want to talk about, straight from your notes if you go back to it, is your shelving filter. The shelving filter boosts the level of low frequencies or high frequencies. Shelves have a corner frequency that determines where the slope starts working. They also have a bandwidth or a Q that determines the steepness of the slope. So I can really just roll through here and get a really nice tone based on this nice little sweep here. And I'm just kind of hitting this little yellow dot. But let's look further. On the bottom, you'll see here that dot is located here, and our attenuation is here, of course. And everything that we're moving, the frequency field from within that dot, is adjusting the frequency of the selected band, as you can see within our little yellow tab there. Now we've got second one down here, the gain slope field. Set the amount of gain for the selected band. We can set that boost. And that's exactly what I was just doing to sweep through it, of course, right? But maybe this could be just a little bit more precision for us. And then the Q field. Adjust the Q factor or resonance of the affected range around the center frequency. And so this could really dial it in or get us a nice little broad stroke. You see there? There we go. And continuing on, let's get to our peaking filters. And if you look up here on the top, we've got a total of 4 of them. Each aspect that we've got in that set, it's the same idea. We've got that little yellow dot. And so in this particular case, peaking filters create a peak or a trough that can be used to boost or cut the low mid-range frequency and the upper mid-range frequency. Peaking filters have a center frequency that determines where the center of the trough or peak is located, and they also have a bandwidth or a Q that determines the width of the peak or the trough. And so let's just kind of roll through here again. As you see here, I could sweep through this, but if I really want to dial this in, and I'll give you some ideas, for example. Let's just go back to the bottom. There's our frequency field. And so just adjusting that frequency field, I could get back to it. And of course, if I wanted to, I could get to my lower mid-range or upper mid-range easy. On top of that, in the middle, you've got the amount of gain for the selected band. So that's just going to boost it or cut it. And then on the bottom, this is the interesting one, adjusting the Q factor or resonance of the affected range around the center frequency. This we could tighten up in this particular case. And if we wanted to, we could utilize this for precision. Maybe taking away an air conditioner because that air conditioner is rumbling at 110 potentially or so. Very, very nice. And I've used this several times to take away air conditioners, no joke. Really easy. So as you can see here, we have access to several, and they're all the same, essentially. So if we wanted to, we could get a really nice, precise booster cut, and then I could take away the air conditioner on top of that, right? We have 4 ways to work with our peaking filter. Beautiful stuff. Now, looking at frequency masking, oftentimes when we're working with the track, we have obviously 20, 30, 40 different tracks that we're working with in any major mix that we're putting together, of course. And so one of the things we have to understand is if sounds sound similar, for example, if a cymbal is in the same frequency range as a guitar, they may potentially cancel each other out. So frequency masking. Frequency masking occurs when 2 or more instruments are played together. If one instrument is stronger than the other in a particular frequency range, then the frequency range becomes harder to hear in the second instrument. So for example, the high frequencies in the cymbals can mask the high frequencies in a vocal. It's very common. So some of the things that we could do maybe potentially is not just in panning, but if we had multiple tracks, and if, let's say, for example, one of the tracks was a vocal track and the other one was the cymbal, maybe potentially the vocal track will be set a certain way. Let me just go back to a default here. Maybe our vocal track could be set potentially with this little guy. And we haven't talked about that yet. And maybe I could do a little shelf and open that up. And then now if I went back to the second cymbal, in this case, our vocal being channel 1 and the cymbal being channel 2, maybe potentially the cymbal, we could do a very different EQ so that they don't mask. And then in this particular case, as you could see, I'm boosting the highs and I'm boosting the air band a little bit within that vocal. And within the cymbal now, I'm doing just the opposite. I'm cutting all of those, so we lose some of that color. And maybe potentially that will allow that vocal to stand out a little bit more. Just hypotheticals. And as I'll roll a mix here for you in real time, you'll totally get it. It's really easy. Another aspect that you might run into is low frequencies found in bass can mask the low frequencies in a kick drum. So the same idea, just imagine then this would be an EQ curve for a kick drum. Maybe potentially my kick drum, I want to boost a little bit more of the mid-range. And I'm going to cut some of those sub-ranges or the very bassy aspect, so I'm cutting all the way down to 20 or so. Now if I went to, in this case, if that's the kick drum, we'll go to the second channel, and the second channel being the bass. Maybe the bass will be a very different boost or cut. So now I'm going to take my bass maybe potentially and just open up my bass, so my bass is all sub. And that might work. And as you can see here, similar frequencies, but at the same time, I'm utilizing the filters that we've just gone through to make them match and to make them work together within the mix. Really easy stuff. And at the same time, the most important thing that we can talk about is the one that I'm utilizing every day, and many of us as professionals are utilizing this every day, and that's your high-pass filtering. And so we're going to end on this one for sure, but to make sure that we understand the importance of this, within our exercises that we'll be doing, and hopefully we'll be seeing here shortly, or I'll send you these files essentially, and you can drag and drop them here in Logic if you've got Logic at home or Pro Tools or anything else. And we'll want to focus on this one aspect for sure, the high-pass filtering. A high-pass filter is an equalizer that filters out low frequencies and allows high frequencies to pass. A high-pass filter has a cutoff frequency that determines where the filter begins to take effect, and the filter slope determines how quickly frequencies are attenuated from the cutoff frequency. Filter slope is expressed in decibels per octave. So what we would say is apply high-pass filtering in order to remove unwanted low frequencies from a track. Or removing unwanted low frequencies creates room in your balance for instruments. So for example, we could take out certain frequencies from the bass and we could boost certain frequencies from a kick drum or vice versa. Most importantly, when our vocals or with cymbals, with snares, there's a lot of things that are going to bleed that we don't necessarily need. So in this particular case, let's just look at our high-pass filtering. This is going to be the key, I think, for you, and one of the biggest ones that we can bring to you as you'll be working in the professional field. I think what you're going to find is that most of your tracks should be applying your high-pass filter. And obviously, in this particular case, we're cutting the lows and we're letting the highs pass. And essentially, hopefully it'll make sense. Now, you can see we've got multiple filters. That would be the low-pass filter up on the top. But the one we want to focus on in this particular case is to just make sure that we're cutting out all of that unwanted mud. So again, one more time, then you've got your frequency field, adjusting the frequency here, right? You've got your gain or slope field, setting the amount of gain for the selected band. And so I could just really sweep through nicely that way. And this is going to be a big part of your tone. You're going to find if you spend time doing this, you're going to really get a nice sound. You're going to really lock things in the way that you want to. The Q field, again, in this particular case, we can tighten that up. But really easy stuff to do. I think that you'll find that utilizing this particular practice is not only easy, but it's very, very professional and probably one of the most valuable things that we can bring you. Now, another aspect we definitely want to talk about and not oversimplify is this is the channel EQ that you'll find. And there's a few of them that are in here. And what are the differences? Channel EQ is going to be wonderful for mixing. You're going to have tons of tracks, maybe 20, 30 tracks at a time. So we don't necessarily want to bog our computer down. But there are going to be times where you're going to be working with live instruments. And when you do work with live instruments, we suggest using the linear phase EQ. This is going to be a lot more precise, especially when you've got instruments in the room and the instruments are capturing sound at the same time. You should run away from some of those phasing issues that you'll find within the channel EQ. Now, with that, I don't necessarily hear too many problems when we're working with loops and things like that, the found sounds that we're going to be getting from our loop banks. So the channel EQ, for most of your projects, you should be fine. But one of the things I do want to point out about this linear EQ, of course, is that when it comes down to live instruments, this is really going to help you in terms of cutting and things like that. It's going to tighten the sound up immensely. But please rest assured that the channel EQ is going to sound wonderful for the tracks that you've got when you're not utilizing microphones. My disclaimer on the linear EQ, if you decide that that's what you want to do, it's very intense in terms of processor usage. And so be careful. You could bring the computer to its knees for sure. Very quickly then, I'm just going to kind of roll through here and I'm going to give you an example of how we can utilize some of this. And so I'm going to just bring in a track, and this is something that we'll be doing in class, or I'll bring this to you again. And of course, don't worry about anything more than just kind of following along in this case. And so I've got my materials here, and I'm going to just basically bring in a track here that we've got. And this is a track, a reggae track we've got Arise for us. This is located on the desktop on your computers. Essentially, I'll get these for you, or if worse comes to worse, don't even worry about it. I'll send it to you, obviously, if we don't get back here. So I'll use the existing tracks or create new tracks. In this case, we want to create new tracks. And now I should see everything populated within Arise. Just a quick review, just hit Command 2 and we can see our mixer and see all the tracks that we've got working with in that sense. So here, just to get started, I'm going to solo out the kick drum only. We should be able to kind of see what's going on. And one of the fun things about this then is and I'll call up the linear phase EQ. We can analyze everything that's happening. This little analyzer here on the bottom, if you don't see it, it's just simply because it's shut off. So click on that guy. And you see how I'm analyzing this. So maybe potentially I want that kick drum to have a little bit of a cut. Now I might want just a touch of a boost in the mid-range to get that guy going a touch. But we could take down just some of the highs. That's a kick drum. We don't necessarily need it. I'm not going to take it down straight to the floor like I would on a cut. I might want some of that band, so let's just take it down with the shelf in this case, right? Now I'll just keep going very quickly. Let's find some of our snares here. Linear phase, analyze it, and look at here. We don't need that information. You see how that's actually not used. And did the snare change? Well, if I cut this all the way up, the snare sound is definitely going to change. But if I'm subtle about it, we get a really nice punch to the tone. And now with that snare, we might want just a little bit to boost, just a touch. You hear, adds a little bit of brightness. And of course, our quality right now isn't going to be ideal, but you get the idea, at least in terms of watching as we're working through. Going to linear phase one more time. This is our hi-hat, right? Cut this guy in. Now, let's analyze that hi-hat, and you'll see the hi-hats, they're all highs, right? So I can cut that real tight. Maybe even bring some of those highs down so we don't have to worry about that masking within some of our vocal frequencies. And on and on. Now with that, not to waste your time, but I'm just going to very quickly then go down. What could we do for our bass? Analyzing the bass, we also have that. Doesn't that look like the kick drum? So maybe for the bass, instead of really cutting it like we did on the kick, I'm going to boost just a little bit here at 500, and I'm going to use my shelf to give me just a touch of low. There we go. Our kick and our bass now will not mask because they're a little bit different. Here's our kick. And there is our bass. Just subtle differences, but tightening it up based on our EQ usage, right? I'll just do a couple little guitars here very quickly. You'll see the linear phase analyzation of the guitar. We obviously don't need a lot of that low end, so let's cut that out. Nice. A little bit of boost on the 2K for the guitar just to get it to cut just a little bit. And on and on. I'll just put some organ here. We've got the lows and the highs of the organ. Interesting. So, obviously the highs of the organ, we're going to cut. And the lows of the organ, we should leave alone, right? I'll go back to it. Now we've got our organ low. We analyze that, of course, and I might just leave that and then cut the highs. But even listening through this, kind of primitive output, hopefully you can tell the differences in the separation that we're able to make here. And I'll just kind of lock it in very quickly with the nice vocal. Now let's get that vocal to stand out. Cut those lows out. Now we've got a nice little presence. And let's open up our shelf in this case, and let's let that airband roll. You see where the mid-range is set? Let's make sure we bring that up just a little bit. Not too bad, right? Now I think one of the things that we also could find that would be wonderful too is that if we're looking at now on top of it, color, we've made a lot of cuts, but if I wanted to add low end, if I wanted to add highs, if I wanted to add mids, what are some of the smart things that we can do? So what I like in this particular case is to cut first and add color later. And so if you looked at the notes that we had talked about, just going back to it, you could see that in those notes I've got this usage of vintage EQ and Logic. And I think that some of you are going to find that this is wonderful. Logic is giving us a bunch of these emulations. And so with that said, that's not your channel EQ. These are emulations based on actual pieces of hardware that have been in existence for, 40, 50 years in some cases. The Neve 1073 is huge when it comes to vintage consoles, and we've talked about that. Neve is a magic word when it comes down to color and EQ usage. And with that said, on top of that, the API 550, as you guys know, Nirvana is one of my favorite bands in the world, and the API 560, that's a big part of their guitar tone. Nirvana had access to the Neve console, and Butch Vig came in with the API 560 to attenuate even further, and that's, again, within the realm of buying any of this in today's world through the 500 series or through emulations, of course, right? And on top of that, then we also have that Pultec, and I'll show you exactly where that Pultec is set to. And the Pultec is also a wonderful piece of gear. And so with that, very quickly, you've got the link, a brief history of the Neve 1073. If you look on the notes on that link, it's really cool. If you read through it, you'll see that, not only is it, tons and tons of bands, but, when it comes down to it, it's the 1073 is just a huge part of recording history, not, much less, the music that it was recorded on. Rupert Neve's an absolute genius in what he's been able to do in terms of bringing out frequency response, in terms of, more than what we hear within our human hearing. It's more of a perception with some of these consoles. It's beautiful. The API 560, as you can see here, with the knife blade switches, is really, really easy to use. And most importantly, this is set to the 500 series, so most of the time you're going to have access to the power supply. And I'll show you this here too in the next video that I send out. Utilizing a 500 series, being able to put in these very choice pieces of color may potentially be the way that you like to work. You may not need to go and buy a recording console. I did not. On top of that, you'll see here your Pultecs, and talking about the beauty of the Pultec. And with that, the Pultec has been utilized in tons of studios, and some of the cats that we had been working with in the past, like Dennis Mackay, for example, or even some of the studios in Motown. Pultec has been around for decades, and with that, we're looking at this as being, of the ultimate when it comes down to tube EQ and even harmonics, very, very smooth and beautiful. I think that you'll find that it's also, legendary, but we don't have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to be able to buy all of this. And so one of the things I like to bring to you, of course, is that they are being emulated. And so, of course, it's nice to have the real thing. There's no better plugin than the ones that we plug in. But in this case, just remember this. Going back to what we had talked about within our kick drum, what happens on the kick drum then if we utilize what we were just studying? And instead, I'm just unsoloing everything out very quickly so I can hear the kick drum only. Instead, let's add our vintage console. So in the kick drum, for example, let's say for maybe the sense of a better word, we want that kick to sound a little warmer. So I'm going to call up this Pultec. Looking on the bottom here, you see where our frequencies can be set, and we can attenuate those frequencies. And so if I wanted to attenuate at 100, I could. But let's just use a little cheat sheet here. Look where the kick drum's pushing. You see the kick drum's pushing here anywhere from 50 to 100. So if I came here, and if I looked at my low frequency, and if I went anywhere from 50 to 100, I could say that this would be a pretty good way to go, wouldn't it? So maybe if I set this dial at 60 and boost the lows and attenuate those lows, now I've got a really nice punchy kick. It's that easy. One of the things I like to look at too, as far as these are concerned, is essentially if I wanted to adjust my highs, I could. It's the same idea. Attenuating at 1K or attenuating at 4, 6K, all the way up to 16K, and then I can boost those highs. Of course, in a kick drum, I don't want to do that, right? And then I've got my high attenuation in this case to go even further, and as you can see, I can attenuate at 20 and out. The other aspect is that it gives us an output model. And so that was the point of me showing you those links, because each one of these are historically referenced. So as you can see here, this being silky, essentially, silky smooth, right, as far as your Pultec is concerned. So now I've got this kick drum that's working really, really nice. And so most of you are probably thinking, well, then let's make sure that we don't do the same thing for our basses, right? So if I've got those two things happening at the same time, the last thing I'm going to do is use that tube EQ, right? Let's go to our vintage console then, and maybe in this case, I want that bass to still sound warm, but at the same time, I don't want it to sound the same as that Pultec. So now I've called up the Neve emulation. Looking at this cut, look at there. We've got our low cut button if we wanted that, but we certainly don't need that. We want our basses to roll all the way through, so we don't want to put that cut on. Now in that sense too, you see where we've got our shelf here up on the top? Let's let that shelf roll, and in this case you see I'm opening up 35. Let's look at what it is. Let's not guess. Look at the linear EQ. And again, I'm at anywhere from about probably 70, 80 to about 200. See there? So let's go back. Let's look at our Neve EQ. And let's try to get to that. There we go. You see there? Now I'm boosting about 110 or so. I'm going to open up that low gain. And maybe potentially opening up a little bit of mid gain too. And now we really have a nice kick drum sound and a really nice bass sound. And they work together. They work together because obviously we've got a different cut and we've got a different color. So a simple rule of thumb, make your cut and then add your color. Some of you may potentially want to add some compression and some fun stuff in the middle, so definitely do so. But add in the middle and then open everything up later in your color. Let's keep going. My snare, I want my snare to sound a little bit brighter. I don't want it to sound the same as that warm tube EQ. So maybe potentially now I could take that snare and a little trick. That API is really nice for mid-range. So now I've got my cuts on that snare, that rim, and then I'm just going to add just a touch of color. And if you look at the output, punchy, right? If I wanted to add color, it's above. To cut, it's below. So in this case, I could also cut. I've also obviously cut within my linear EQ, but maybe add another little cut here too, just to add a touch to it. And I'll keep going. We had that hi-hat. I want that hi-hat maybe potentially also to be a little bit aggressive. So I'm going to go into that vintage console again. It's not going to be exactly like the snare, but it's going to be close. But you see how that sounds just a touch aggressive comparative to the basses and comparative to the kick. It really makes that stand out. Of course, it might be a little more difficult for you to hear through my particular outputting, but you can kind of see the picture here. Getting to the guitar. Maybe that guitar could go through our really nice warm EQ. Dull it down just a touch. Now, what are the frequency ranges of that guitar? Let's not guess. I would say 500 to 2K, right? So, looking at 500 to 2K, I've got 2K here. Now with that, add a little bit of low end, opening it all the way up to 100. I'm going to take my high boost and add a little bit there. Open up my high bandwidth. Now listen to that guitar just flying through the speakers, right? I'm going to open the air band just a little bit to get a little more brightness out of it. But wonderful cut. On top of that, we can get to our organs. Here's the top of the organ. The top of the organ, maybe we could make that one aggressive. And the bottom of the organ, there's your top. I'm using the API. I want this thing to cut. High frequencies, right? Let's add a punch to those mids. Now let's go to the low aspect of the organ. That low, I want to be tube EQ because I want even harmonics on that. And that low is set with 60, probably a little bit of 2 and 3K, of course, just a touch of mid-range. But I'm not going to do anything on the highs. Just leave that alone. Go back to our beginning here. Now, I'm just going to call it that quick vocal real quick. Let's see what we got there.
Run, run, run.
I'll do another vocal so we got our set too.
Babylon vocal.
Option drag.
Run, run, run.
So I've got a similar cut on that side. Now the first vocal I'm going to set to a console, which is going to go through the Neve. And let's just make sure that that's got a little low end on that vocal. And you see here, I'm going to cut that vocal too at about 80. with this
We
neve on
keep
top of the
on
cut that we did with our linear EQ.
Run, run,
Add a little highs.
run.
Now,
Babylon, I go
the harmony vocal maybe potentially now could come through a different console. Maybe the harmony could go through the tube.
Babylon, Babylon, I go come. Ooh, Babylon.
Very quickly, just rolling through, just getting a little low.
Coming to take it, ooh, take it
Little high set.
away.
And then I'm going to open that
So you better
background vocal here in this case from, it looks like about 10,000. And then I'm going to open this up at 20 and just a touch of highs. So our vocals now, here's our lead coming through the neve, and here's our backing vocal coming through the Pultec to give the lead a nice smooth sound, but at the same time the Pultec to sit back just a little bit, but to also still have a very beautiful presence. So playing this back, as you can kind of see, really quite simple. There's an enormous amount of color and an enormous amount of punch and depth that we've created just through EQ. Cuts, and then most importantly looking at our boosts. So a simple rule of thumb, as you're working with your tracks and anything that you've got, make sure that you create a cut within your linear EQ or your channel EQ, and then if you decide that you want color later and you want more low end, don't go to your EQ and boost it this way anymore. Let's go to our vintage emulations and let's boost it within our vintage EQ. You have a lot of choices and they're all built in. I really hope that helps. Take care and let me know if you need anything. Take care, guys.